Chapter 2, Day 67, Hakor 19, 15,368 EBG. The rest of the day was a study in abuse. The strikes with the stick didn't remove more than 1 health at the most. The worst injury Richter received was actually when he tripped over his own feet and landed on a rock. The minor loss of health did not translate to the pain he felt, though. Yoshi was a true sadist. Richter was convinced that the man had methodically beaten every square inch of his body. After hours of torment, with no lunch break, Richter lamented silently over and over, Yoshi said it was time to stop. That was only because the sun was going down. After Yoshi called it quits for the day, he just picked up his bundle of sticks and walked away without another word. The reason for the large number of sticks became clear after Yoshi had broken the first one against Richter's thigh. The point was further illustrated when the second stick broke across Richter's back. By the third break, Richter stopped thinking about it. That was partly because when that particular branch broke, it was across the back of his head. It was nice having a pause in the training, even if it was because he had been knocked unconscious. Richter slowly stumbled after the sword adept/sadist, his entire body screaming in protest. He just wanted to lay down and stop existing, but he refused to give Yoshi the satisfaction. The entire time they had been training, Yoshi had taunted him. More than once, Richter heard, "All you need to do is walk away." The adept clearly enjoyed inflicting both physical and psychological pain. One moment he would say, "This is not fun for me either." And the next moment, "I take it back. This is fun." A particularly low moment was when Yoshi remarked, "Only sissies vomit." 60 seconds later, he concluded, "Well, I guess I am looking at a sissy." Richter kept upright through the day out of pure spite. He had pride and would not be broken. Who cares if it now took 20 minutes to walk 100 yards? That's not the point. The sprites were gathered at the base of the hearth tree for their evening meal. Sion was sitting at the center table next to Hisako, and Yoshi was sitting next to him. An empty seat was at Hisako's side, reserved for Richter. When Sion saw Richter's pathetic appearance, he started laughing loudly until Yoshi jabbed a quick finger into his companion's throat. After that, his so-called friend was more focused on breathing than mocking him. Richter sat down with a pained noise, and Hisako just looked at him with a sympathetic expression. Was she smirking right before he had turned to look at her? He had to keep his eye on this woman. She might not be too different from her son in terms of twisted humor. All such unworthy thoughts fled, however, with what she did next. Hisako reached out her hand and laid it atop of his. With a few muttered words, a gold light enveloped her hand and spread up his arm and then over the rest of his body. It alleviated his aches and pains and left him with a refreshed feeling. He sighed in relief. Then he looked at Sion, still struggling to breathe. Richter took an exaggerated, deep breath while looking his companion in the eye and then exhaled overly loudly. Sion glared daggers back, his face slightly red. Richter addressed the Hearth Mother. "Thank you, Hisako. Your sword adept was very energetic in his lessons." Yoshi looked up from his food. "Are you complaining, son?" "Not at all, Yoshi. Who doesn't like being beaten with a rod for 12 hours? The half-sprite laughed. "Happy to oblige, then. We will do more when we leave tomorrow." "We?" Richter asked with a sick feeling in his stomach. Yoshi nodded, already eating again. "Yes, the Hearth Mother is leaving the protection of the glade for the first time in over a century. Her protection is paramount."
Yes," Hisako said. "I was going to speak with you about this tonight, Richter. I would like to be there personally for the planting, if you are amenable to that."
"I would be honored," Richter said. He really would be, but he wasn't looking forward to more time with the abusive sword adept. "Well, that settles it then," Yoshi said. "We will train each morning, a bit over lunch and for 2 hours when we stop each night. Right now, your sword work looks like a gnome having a seizure. I should not have to say this, but that is not what you should be striving for. It is important to remember. Yoshi continued to drone on, and Richter just sat back with a sour expression on his face. His appetite had fled for some reason. The next morning, countless sprites were gathered in the golden grasses around the hearth tree. They were arrayed in an expanding spiral with Hisako at the center. Each sprite held hands with the sprite to either side. They had gathered while it was still dark. As the sky began to lighten, they sang. Their already musical voices rose and fell in soft counterpoint. There was no direction or guidance. They simply harmonized as if being led by an unseen orchestra conductor. The music grew as the sky lightened, and a golden glow began to infuse all of the tall grasses. The glow built in intensity, matching the tone of the sprites' voices as the first rays of the sun shone down into the glade of the wood sprites. Hisako raised her own voice, and her soprano rang clear. The seed core was in her hands, and she raised it above her head. The aura of magic permeating the glade intensified, focusing upon Hisako. Pure golden light shot into the sky like a spotlight and then went out. The sprites' voices subsided at the same time. Hisako was left standing in the center of her people with the seed core still above her head. The green veins of light glowed brighter by several orders of magnitude, and small cracks in the shell of the seed leaked bright golden light. Richter expected Hisako to look exhausted, but instead she seemed exhilarated. She handed him the seed core with a broad grin on her face.
Everything went wonderfully. The spell might have yielded a result even more powerful than I had hoped. Let us not waste any time. I think it is time that I saw your home.
She turned in a circle, looking out at her people.
My fellow sprites, I travel now with our friend, Lord Richter of the Mist Village. We will plant a seed core and bring life to a tree of magic.
The wood sprites cheered her pronouncement.
More than that, we will bathe the pixie chrysalis in pure life and hopefully bring at least one pixie back to the land.
This time, the shouts and cheers were deafening. Richter wouldn't have thought it was possible that such small creatures could create such a cacophony, but it was louder than when the Cubs finally won the World Series. The shouts went on for long minutes, despite Hisako's attempts to calm them down. When they finally quieted, she continued,
I will miss you all, and will return soon. Follow the wisdom of the elders who will lead in my absence. Thank you for your help this day, and, as always, stay true to the forest.
Another cheer sounded, and then all of the sprites broke up into various smaller groups and went on about their days. Hisako turned to Yoshi, who was flanked by 20 other armored sprites.
Are we ready to go, Sword Adept Yoshi?
We are, Hearth Mother. In addition to the guard we have arranged, Daniela requests to accompany us. Scion, who had been standing quietly at his mother's side until that moment, decided to chime in. I do not really think that is necessary, Hearth Mother. A smaller group is less likely to attract attention, especially with bugbears and goblins roaming the woods. Daniela was walking up as she spoke.
Thinking, Scion? Never really your strong suit. I would like to see the home of our new neighbors. If it is okay with Lord Richter, that is.
Richter looked at the female sprite and then looked at his friend, Scion. The beseeching gaze on his companion's face was almost pitiful. But what are best friends for, if not to gain a cheap laugh at your expense? He plastered a huge smile on his face. I would be honored to have you join us, Daniela. In fact, you are welcome as long as you like. He gave his best impression of a courtly bow and dipped his head toward the pretty sprite, who laughed delightedly and clapped her hands. When he picked his head back up, he looked at Scion, whose face was screwed up in silent anger. Richter simply smiled even bigger and mouthed the word push-ups. Oh yes, he thought dramatically, you will learn the truth of this old Tarantino proverb. Revenge is a dish best served cold. And it looked like it would be a cold day in hell before Daniela gave Scion a moment's peace.
Well, that settles that,
Hisako said. She turned to Richter.
I did have a thought last night. I do not want to infringe upon your hospitality, but would you do me the favor of hosting one of our elders?
She beckoned to an older sprite who had been standing several paces behind her.
This is Sumiko. Her counsel has guided me through many difficult decisions. I would ask that you accept her as an ambassador between our two peoples. She is also a master of life magic. I believe you would find her aid invaluable.
This wasn't Richter doing Hisako a favor, which she clearly knew. He had very little life magic at his disposal other than his weak charm spell. Unfortunately, it was not the kind of spell he could practice with often. Having a life master to teach him spells and speed his leveling would be incredible. He looked at Sumiko and said, "I would be honored to have you join us for as long as you are willing. Your presence will be a gift, and I will treat it as such." Man, he was really getting good at this grown-up talk. Yoshi looked at them all and shouldered his pack. "The sun slows for no one. It is time to begin our travels." They started walking, but paused at the edge of the golden glade while Hisako took a long look back at the hearth tree. Then she turned away, squared her shoulders, and kept walking forward. The sword adept set a brisk pace. Yoshi said he wanted to limit the time spent out in the open. Richter used the time they were walking to speak with Sumiko. The older sprite was only a few inches above 3 feet, but was spry enough to keep pace. She had an easy smile and long silver hair. Her skin was a touch lighter than the normal olive complexion of the other sprites. Her face was a bit rounder as well. Richter spent the first day just discussing the strengths of life magic with her. She was every bit as pleasant as she looked. Sumiko promised to teach him a spell in the morning. His interactions with Yoshi were somewhat surprising. At the lunch break, the sword adept walked over with a stick. Richter groaned internally, but stood and raised his sword nonetheless. The man simply shook his head and told Richter to sheathe the blade. Rather than beat Richter pillar to post, Yoshi instead showed him a sequence of movements called a form. The first form was named the Forest Wind. It focused on shoulder-length sweeps of Richter's blade for attack. The second was called Willow in the Storm. He was made to move through a series of motions that bent him at odd angles, keeping his sword between him and the anticipated attack. For both, Yoshi focused a greater amount of attention on Richter's stance than his sword position. Each movement required him to be both flexible and balanced. They went through the same series of movements for the half hour allotted for lunch that day. When it was time to move again, Yoshi just corrected his stance a final time by gently prodding one leg, grunted, and then walked away. Richter was certainly not disappointed that he didn't need healing again, but the man's demeanor was so different that it was a bit of a mystery. He wasn't about to complain, though. He shouldered his bag and walked on with everyone else, resuming his conversation with Sumiko. The next several days followed the same pattern. Walking with Sumiko, then, during their rests, training sword forms with Yoshi. He would steal a little time in between to read the lore books he had bought from Leandra. At the end of the second night, Yoshi stood opposite him again, holding a small branch. The sprite attacked from a high guard. Richter responded with Willow in the Storm and flowed out of the path of the attack. It somehow left him in the perfect position to attack with the Forest Wind. The two of them flowed through the movements, their sticks clattering together. Richter now saw how the two forms he had been practicing naturally complemented each other. They kept up this exchange for almost an hour. When they finished a final rapid exchange, Yoshi stepped back and grunted. "Congratulations, you have reached skill level 2 in swordsmanship. Damage plus 3%, chance to cause bleed status plus 0.5%, plus 1% attack speed." The sprite was turning to leave when Richter called out, "I really appreciate you teaching me, but I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to be learning. When I studied with other instructors, I leveled up my skills several times, but my swordsmanship skill seems only to go up when we spar. Why don't we spar the whole time?" "I am teaching you the art of the blade, not how to increase your level. You could bash away at a monster all day long with your sword. It would raise your level, but you would learn nothing. To you, a sword would still just be a club with edges. If you go that route, anyone with a bit of training will still kill you no matter how high your level is," Yoshi replied. That made sense. If there was one thing he had found about the land, it was that the proper application of force was just as, if not more important, than brute force alone. I understand. Thank you again, Master Yoshi, Richter said with a slight bow of his head. The sprite was turning away again when a thought occurred to Richter. Master Yoshi? The sprite turned back. If you are meaning to teach me the art of sword fighting, why did you just beat me with sticks the first day? Yoshi looked at Richter for a moment. Then a rueful expression crossed his face. To be completely honest, I was nursing a massive hangover when they told me Hisako wanted me to meet you. I was in a foul mood. Beating you with rods seemed like a great way to vent my frustration. That might not have been fair, but if it helps, it did put me in a better mood. With that shameless comment, the sprite walked away. Richter just stared after him with his mouth hanging open. Chapter 3, Day 71, Hakor 23, 15,368 EBG. The party arrived at the edge of the confusing mist enchantment mid-morning on the third day. Richter gave the entire party immunity to the mists, and they continued on. Over the past several days, Yoshi had taught Richter a third form, cat swatting at mouse. It focused on quick stabbing attacks while keeping his center of gravity low. Yoshi drilled him in all three, randomly calling out the name of a form. The goal was to have Richter's body respond without thinking. Yoshi made sure that Richter knew he had a long, long way to go. Richter's time with Sumiko had not been wasted either, as shown by the prompts he had accumulated. Congratulations, you have reached skill level 2 in life magic. New spells are now available. Congratulations, you have learned the spell Weak Slow Heal. Restore 30 missing health over 60 seconds upon casting. This is a spell of life magic, level 1. Cost 40 mana. Duration 60 seconds. Range touch. Cast time 1 second. Cooldown 60 seconds. Congratulations, you have learned the spell Weak Cure Poison. Remove weak poison effects. This is a spell of life magic, level 1. Cost 50 mana. Duration 1 second. Range touch. Cast time 2 seconds. Cooldown 30 seconds. Neither spell was extremely powerful, but Sumiko assured him that as his level in life magic increased, the spells he could cast would increase in usefulness correspondingly. A few hours passed as they walked through the mists, and suddenly the village was before them. Richter and Scion had been gone a little over a week. The village was showing the same hustle and bustle that had been there when they left. There were also a few welcome developments. The framework for a wooden cradle had been started by the river, presumably for shipbuilding. Work had also been started on the forge, 3 walls already having been erected. Also, the crude earthwork defenses along the inner edge of the moat surrounding the village had been leveled in long stretches. It would let people stand on the walls to see a greater distance. Richter wondered who had taken the initiative to do that. He certainly approved. As always, Futon met Richter at the boundaries of the village. "Hey, you sexy beast!" Richter greeted the remnant. Futon was the fragment of an ancient magician's soul. He had been tied to this place of power and was meant to serve whomever as the current master of the Mist Village. Futon's body was a simple gray floating sphere with a white light in the center. The orb's light just pulsed slowly, hovering several feet in the air. "Well, don't go getting all mushy on me," Richter laughed. "Okay then, what's been happening since I've been gone?" "Would you like a full report, my lord?" Futon's deadpan voice was no longer strange to Richter. It was even comforting after a fashion. Like the unique sounds and smells of her grandmother's house, Futon's voice served to remind him on a visceral level that he had come home. "No, just anything that requires my immediate attention." "All events can wait until you are settled, my lord." "Good! No news is good news. Futon, this is Lady Hisako, the master of the Hearth Tree and leader of the Wood Sprites. She and all members of her party are honored guests. Extend them every courtesy and respond to their questions when asked. Now please go ahead of us and have some accommodations prepared for them. The men can bunk in the barracks. Lady Hisako and Daniela," he indicated the other female sprite, "will stay in my room."
Lord Richter, that is not necessary. Hisako protested.
I won't have it any other way, Hisako. I don't have much hospitality to offer yet, but what I do have is yours. Now please, come see my village.
The party continued walking forward, and the various new settlers of the Mist Village looked up as they passed. Whatever tasks they were attending to were forgotten. How could carrying water compete with the master of their new home, being accompanied by a squad of armed sprite warriors? By the time Richter had walked to the foot of the hill leading to the first floor of the catacombs, more than 100 villagers had gathered. He climbed part of the way up the hill and then turned to look out at his people.
I was planning on gathering everyone later, but enough of you are here now. This is Lady Hisako, the leader of the Wood Sprites. They are our friends, and we are lucky to have them. This is the first time she has graced us with her presence, but I look forward to a warm and profitable relationship between our two peoples for many years to come. The benefits of our friendship start for us today. The Hearth Mother has come with a blessing. We will be planting an enchanted tree, and the blessing will make sure that it grows strong.
The people nodded and smiled. It wasn't exactly a resounding cheer, but it seemed they were on board, so Richter would take it. He hadn't really thought about the logistics of keeping close to 300 people happy when he had recruited them, but he had a feeling that morale wasn't something he just wanted to ignore. Richter looked at Hisako. When should we do this? I see no reason to wait, she said. The weather is clear now, but there are clouds on the horizon. We can perform the ceremony before the weather breaks. Futon floated towards them from the entrance of the catacombs.
My lord, am I correct in assuming that you plan to plant a seed core in the village?
Richter was somewhat surprised that the remnant knew what a seed core was. Futon had been around for tens of thousands of years, but his memory was fragmented. That is what I'm planning. What do you know about seed cores?
Only that they are powerful relics, and that several previous masters have attempted to obtain one from the wood sprites but had no success. They always lamented that the sprites would not provide one. Seeing the Hearth Mother here and hearing of a blessing, that seemed a reasonable deduction.
The remnant's memory seemed to be improving, Richter thought. Futon was also capable of greater cognitive reasoning than Richter would have thought. His interaction with the Grey Sphere was normally limited to giving orders and receiving reports. He would have to keep this in mind. Do you remember anything else? He asked the remnant.
No, my lord. Many specific details still remain beyond my grasp. I would offer a suggestion, however. I heard the Sprite Mother suggest planting the seed now, but I believe tonight would be a better choice.
Why do you say this? Hisako asked. She was looking at the remnant with curiosity, but also with caution. Richter didn't understand why she looked so pensive.
I believe you are operating as if you were at your own place of power, Master Hisako. I can sense that you are a master of light, life, and earth. Were we planting the seed at your seat of power, then this would be the perfect time. The Mist Village, however, is built upon a nexus of life, dark, water, and air. The most auspicious time would be when the environment complements those powers. I suggest that we wait until nightfall. That will coincide with our dark power. The presence of the storm will fulfill the obligation of the air and water powers. The seed core itself is life magic. I believe that waiting will provide the highest chance to obtain a powerful tree.
Richter looked at Hisako. What do you think? His reasoning is sound. When I advised to plant the core now, I admit that in the back of my mind, I was applying reasoning that would be best for the hearth tree. The blessing will easily last until tonight. It will also let me find the best place to plant the seed core. Okay then, Richter said. I will let you all explore and relax after our trip. If you need anything, just ask. I'm going to check in with my people. He looked over at Scion, who, as usual, had not been able to shed Daniela's company. His companion looked at him with hope in his eyes, expecting to be asked along. Richter smiled toothily. Scion, why don't you show Daniela around? I won't need you until the ceremony tonight. He turned and walked to greet his people. Scion's glare washed over him like the comforting warmth of sunlight. Richter's first stop was to check in at the half-constructed smithy. He was greeted by his wood elf carpenter, Roswan.
The elf was a gruff, 6-foot-tall man with a somewhat terse manner. What made him truly stand apart was his hairstyle. Most elves had long, straight hair that they wore loose or plaited. Roswan cut his hair short into a thick mop and wore it high and tight with a large part to the left. He was also one of the few elves with facial hair, and he sported a thick brown mustache. "Hello, Roswan," Richter said. Roswan just made a half growl and kept working on his current project. Richter gave a sigh. The cantankerous man was not the easiest person to work with. If only he wasn't so good at his job. "So how is the construction of the forge going?" The framework was up, as were the walls he had seen upon coming back to the village. They had also apparently laid the floor using slate as opposed to wood. Probably a good idea, seeing as how there would be countless sparks and embers from the forge. The elf gave the same response he had given before when Richter had asked for a progress report. "It's being built." Richter waited for any more information, but as per usual, nothing more was forthcoming. "I love our little talks, Roswan," was the only response. Richter gave a half-sigh. "Where are Hilda and the other dwarves?" Hilda was one of the dwarf elders that had initially agreed to come to the village. "They're poking around in the mountains," he said, gesturing to the foothills and mountains north of the village. "Might be back tonight for dinner." "Well, is there anything you need?" Richter asked. "More wood, more help, more bacon and eggs," the elf said without looking up. Richter just shook his head at the man. "Not even a that time." Richter walked on. He tried to say hello to everyone. Most just gave a polite smile or wave and then went on about their business. Luckily, his analyze skill let him know everyone's names, or he would have had no clue as to most. His skill did require mana, though, which he didn't have an infinite supply of at any given time, so there was a fair amount of "looking good" and "my man" thrown into his greetings as well. Richter walked past the walls of the village, out into the newly cultivated farmland. Dozens of people were planting various crops. He had bought corn, wheat, potatoes, some soy-like plant called ephes, tomatoes, and a host of others. There were no citrus or other apple trees, unfortunately. One of the things Richter planned to buy from Hafiz was a series of fruit trees. He had bought several barrels of apples and a type of large citrus fruit that tasted like a mix between passion fruit and limes, but with no refrigeration, they would not last long. Richter had wondered about getting a balanced diet. Of course, he might be worrying for nothing. After all, who knew how his body here matched up with his old Earth body? It would be the bonehead move of all time, though, to become a powerful warrior and mage and then develop scurvy. All of his impromptu farmers seemed to be on task and happy, so Richter didn't rock the boat. He was not one to micromanage people who knew their job better than he did. It was a well-stressed point during his upbringing that a smart leader found people smarter than himself and then put them to work. Richter had seen no reason to think he had chosen his new villagers poorly. He spent an hour walking among the farmers and speaking with the guards who patrolled the edges of the forest. It had never been far from Richter's mind that though the mists were an effective deterrent against most humanoids, wild animals and certain monsters would not be affected. Luckily, the guards said there had been no incursions close to the village. That did not mean the forest was safe. They also reported that the hunters had spied several cave bears to the north, and a pack of wolves had been close enough to hear howls a few days ago. Richter decided to start organizing larger hunting parties. The site the village was being built upon had been wild and untouched land for hundreds of years. There was no overestimating the dangers that lurked nearby, and he swore to himself that he would not forget that. After walking through the fields, Richter then walked to the river that was to the west of the village. His destination was the wooden cradle that had been set up to start building the village's first ship. The closest hub of trade was the kingdom of Eve. On foot, the journey took almost 3 weeks. With a ship to navigate the countless rivers in this part of the world, the journey could be accomplished in a fraction of the time. If trade was to become a regular part of life, the ship was of paramount importance. Richter had been lucky enough that a high elf adept shipbuilder and her 2 apprentices had agreed to come to the village. Skill ranks, after all, were not arbitrary in the land. Novice was skill level 1 through 9. 10 through 24 granted the rank of initiate. Levels 25 through 44 meant you were an apprentice. Journeymen were levels 45 to 69. Adepts were 70 to 99, and masters had achieved skill level 100 and above. What the ranks meant seemed to vary from skill to skill, as far as Richter could tell. Magic masters and adepts could teach spells without spellbooks. Training with someone of a higher rank would increase the rate that someone leveled their skills. Other than that, Richter really didn't have an understanding of how the ranks impacted anything. "Ho, the shipbuilder!" Richter called out.
Very funny, my lord,
The shipbuilder said. Giovanna was short for a high elf at 5.5 feet. She had long black hair plaited to her waist, a petite figure, and broad hips. Rather broad and round, actually. Richter had noticed that she switched when she walked in a very distracting way. Richter liked her for her confident attitude and competent manner. An old boss had told him once that competence was one of the greatest virtues and one of the most overlooked. The man had said what he really needed to know about someone he worked with was if they would do what they said they would do, and if they would do it well. Giovanna struck him as a woman who got the job done. Despite his respect for her, the elf's ample curves had made his mind meander to other jobs she might be good at. When they had first come to the village, she had caught him staring a time or two. She never seemed angry, though. She just gave him a challenging little smile and then stared right back. He decided to forego that this morning, speaking up before she noticed him. "I'm glad to see that you've started on the ship." The ribbing was well on the way to being complete as far as Richter could tell. "Is there anything you need from me?"
Things are moving well, but if I could have one of those mist workers allocated to me, then things would move a good deal faster, she said.
"Done," Richter said promptly. Mist workers were magical constructs that Richter could summon. They lacked any real intelligence, but they were strong and had good reserves of stamina. They couldn't be trusted with complicated tasks, but were perfectly suited for manual labor. When the villagers had found out about the magical beasts of burden, they all decided they had to have one. Needless to say, demand was high. Ship construction was a high priority for Richter, so Giovanna got whatever she needed. There was no internet in the land. The only way for his village to be connected to the rest of the world was to physically travel to neighboring towns and settlements. He had arranged for one of the ships that had brought the settlers to the Mist Village to return to the boundaries of the confusing mist spell in several weeks' time. The cost of arranging that had been several gold coins paid up front, something that was still sticking in his craw. That had amounted to several hundred US dollars, dollars that were eating into his potential profits. "How long until the ship will be ready?" Richter asked.
Should be river ready in 3 months,
Giovanna said with certainty. Richter widened his eyes. "That soon? I was expecting it to take the better part of a year." "Ha!" she scoffed.
Maybe it would take that long for ham-fisted humans.
She looked up with a stricken look when she remembered the lord of her new village was human. Richter just gestured for her to keep going with an amused expression on his face. She nodded gratefully and continued.
As I was saying, high elves are the finest shipbuilders in the land. Each of us is proficient with a certain type of magic as well. I have affinities for water and earth magic, both at apprentice skill level. My aides have affinities for water and air magic, respectively.
"So you cast spells to make the work go faster?" Richter asked.
That is part of it, but also, we just maintain a low level of ambient mana when we are working.
Seeing that Richter wasn't following, she explained further.
You can cast different types of spells, correct? I'm sure you have noticed that right before casting spells of different types of magic, there is a recognizable feeling. For myself, casting water spells feels different than casting earth spells.
Richter nodded. His earth magic spells made him feel solid, for lack of a better description. Water magic gave him a cool, fluid feeling, and his weak ice dagger spell made his hands feel cold right before casting, though that may have been specific to that spell.
We focus on that feeling while we work, my lord. We do not actually cast spells, we simply access the mana and let it flow into our work. The process is somewhat taxing as we are still continually depleting our mana pools, but we have found that the ships will ultimately be stronger and faster by infusing mana while we work. That's one of the reasons high elves are such excellent craftsmen. In addition to having a high shipbuilding skill, we increase our skill level in magic as well. Of course, the ship won't be as strong as enchanted ships and won't have anywhere near the power of Kaitachi vessels.
Just call me Richter, he said absently. It wasn't often his gift of tongues ability didn't automatically translate every word. It only seemed to happen when the word expressed a concept he wasn't fully familiar with. Kaitachi translated as caught souls. I don't understand, Richter said. Are you saying you can make the ship stronger? Why don't you? Seeing his confusion, Giovanna explained further.
A jewel can be infused with a spell and attached to the ship. An example would be the earth spell I know, minor durable wood. The spell would be infused into a jewel and then attached to the ship. The ship's structure would be stronger. The size of the ship usually means that several jewels need to be strategically placed in key positions, however. Otherwise, you would have one part of the ship much stronger than the others. It might not seem important, but the boards of a ship need to swell and shrink together. If one area is much stronger than the others, it creates a stress point that might snap the ship in two. I'm sure you can see that using several jewels for one effect, while beneficial to the ship, would be very costly.
Richter nodded his understanding. He wasn't completely disregarding the possibility, though. He still had many jewels in his inventory, and it might be worth using a few to enchant the ship. What about a Kaitachi?
A Kaitachi vessel is something else entirely, my Richter. It requires a soul stone that has been invested with a spirit to be irreversibly bonded to a ship. The stronger the spirit, the stronger the vessel. This is not an exact process, she cautioned. Over time, the vessel takes on the characteristics of the spirit. I will give you an example. There is a monster called a water dancer that skips over the tops of rivers and lakes on long, thin legs. It spreads its weight out so each point of contact only dimples the water but never actually penetrates the surface. Dancers are detestable creatures and will use a paralytic poison to stun you. While you're immobilized, they insert a thin proboscis into your body and drink your blood.
She shuddered for a second before continuing.
As horrible a creature as it is, however, if a spirit was caught in a soul stone and then bonded to a ship, that ship would skip over the waves and move faster through the water than almost any others.
So if I got you a soul stone filled with the right type of soul, you could bond it to the ship? Richter asked.
Well, that takes a shipmaster who is also at least a journeyman in the sub-skill Kaitachi bonding, she said regretfully.
Richter's hopes fell.
Lucky for you, I am just that amazing,
Giovanna said with a smug look on her face. Richter smiled back at the saucy elf. Really? Oh, I could kiss you!
Calm down, Richter. It's not that kind of party.
She was still smiling, though. How do I get a soul stone? He asked.
That is outside of my realm of expertise, she said. But some of the other mages here should have some ideas.
Fair enough, he said, delighted. Then I will let you get back to work. Futon, send over a mist worker daily from here on out, instructed to follow the instructions of Giovanna and her apprentices. Yes, my lord, the remnant said. Richter said his goodbyes and started walking back towards the village. He needed to talk to Randolphus. As he was entering the walls, he was greeted by his companion, Tarad. Hello, my friend, Richter said, clasping wrists with the former innkeeper. Tarad had large bags under his eyes and a harried look. Barely 2 weeks ago, the man had carried the dead body of his best friend in a desperate escape from Law, the capital city of Eve. That loss, coupled with trying to be a pillar of support for his psychologically damaged love, Isabel, was clearly wearing the man down. Richter felt a bit of guilt over having left his companion in charge for the last week. Tarad needed more time to recover. He would speak to the carpenters about building a small private cottage for Isabel and his friend as soon as there was time. Hello back, Tarad said with a tired smile. Did you accomplish everything you needed to on your trip? I did. I'm not sure if you know, but the leader of the Wood Sprites has come back to perform a ceremony for us. I had heard a contingent of sprites had come back with you, but I wasn't sure why. Well, either way, it's good to see you. Is there anything I should know about what happened over the past week? Richter asked.
Some predator animals were seen by hunters, but none came close to the village. As you can see, all the villagers are settling in well. Randolphus has been amazing in foreseeing problems before they arise.
I'm glad to hear that. It brings up the other topic I wanted to talk with you about, Richter said. He looked the man in the eye and spoke softly but firmly. I think you should have some private time with Isabel. You don't need to do anything else for a while. Just let me know when you're ready.
That isn't necessary, Tarad protested. I can pull my weight.
Richter continued to look at him with a serious expression. I know you can, Tarad, but look around you. None of the people you see would be here if it wasn't for your efforts. You are the one that included me in the raid with the Nightblades. You were the one that organized for me to speak with the 5 elders. And you are the one who introduced me to Mama. Richter paused before continuing. You have already done more than I could ever ask. Now I need you to focus on just one thing. Be there for Isabel. Help her heal and heal yourself as well. I have a feeling there will be many trials in the days to come. I will need you at your best. Tarad looked at Richter a few more seconds, and then reached out and squeezed his friend's shoulder.
Thank you. I will take a few days to be with Isabel, and will be ready when you need me.
Richter smiled. Good. Now walk with me for a moment until I find Randy. Tarad smiled back.
You know he hates being called that.
Randy, or Randolphus, as was his proper name, was a wonderful aide, but was also a bit stuffy. Why do you think I'd do it? Richter asked with a laugh.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed those clips again. The audiobook is coming. There was a bit of a mix-up with the holiday, but I promise it is in the pipeline. And great news is that Nick is already working on books 3 and 4. We should have those maybe in less than a month. All right, have a great one. Bye.